2 days before he was to go to DC. He was going to show this stuff to the FBI as well as to Pagano. He's found dead in his office, 2 bullet holes at the back of his head, left side. And, we have a photo of all this. We got the police file with all the photos of it. He's lying there like this, 2 bullet holes here. Before the coroner even showed up, the Buffalo police pronounced it a suicide, even though he had a problem gripping with his left hand. So how do you take a gun in your right hand and shoot yourself on the back left side of the head? You can't. It's, and 2 shots when it's a suicide. I mean, it didn't make any sense. And yet being killed in plain sight like that is a warning sign to people. It's like, don't dig deeper into this, right? And all of his files vanished. When I was in Europe, people came to me with stories of, the ritual killing of children, and in a cult that's called the Ninth Circle. It goes back many centuries. That's a whole other area of work. We've done recent work on adjudicating cases against the people responsible. It very much relates to the geopolitical situation because it has to do with what people in those pinnacles of power can get away with legally. And basically, they can get away with anything.
Welcome to Discourse with Christian. I'm your host, Christian White, and today is a guest by the name of Kevin Annett, who is a renowned global human rights campaigner, author, and whistleblower who has led the movement to expose and prosecute child murder by church and state in Canada and Europe. Kevin is the co-founder of the International Tribunal of Crimes of Church and State. He has also been twice nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize, and his website, www.murderbydecree.com, is a website in which you can learn more about him and what he's working on, as well as his books. And Kevin, it's an honor to meet you. How are you?
Fine, just very busy.
Well, I first came across your work through Sean Atwood, and so I want to give him a shout out. And I found what you have dispensed to his audience to be fascinating, and I was first kind of exposed to this kind of world through a guest that I first had on probably about almost 8 months ago by the name of Dave Collum, and he had mentioned about kind of these, kind of cults and satanic and things of that nature. And I have, because I cover geopolitics, I've covered macro finance and the current state of society. I have had other guests bring and make mentionings of this. And for those in the audience who haven't heard this before, some of this stuff sounds so out there, but the more and more one dives in and does research and such, this becomes a common theme. And so I feel like it's so germane as it relates to understanding geopolitics in the world, some of the power players behind the scenes who are engaged in various nefarious activities and such. So, Kevin, I figured if you could please share with the audience kind of how you got into this in this quest for truth and such, and kind of where we are now.
Well, for me, it began 30 years ago, actually. I was a Protestant minister on the west coast of Canada, and I began to work with a lot of Indigenous people. And the very first Native home I went into, I heard stories about children disappearing in the local church-run Indian school. And it kind of opened the door to me to a whole different direction in life. I was barely 40 at the time, had 2 young daughters. And then, the upshot of all that was that as I invited more natives into the church, they began to tell stories about a lot of children who had died and, um, being trafficked and other things in the local schools. I didn't shut up about it. And I was warned by the church to be quiet about it because the United Church that I worked for at the time had been running these places, which are known about now. They're called Indian residential schools because of the campaign I started. This all came out. The Catholics, the Anglicans, and others ran these places, where it turns out over half the children never came back. We're talking a death rate of over 50% every year for half a century. And these were like killing grounds. I mean, and it's not, if you know anything about the history of genocide in the world, it's not unusual for Native people sitting on wealthy land and resources to be exterminated. And that happened in Canada as well as America and around the world, but it had never been talked about here. So after I got fired, the church went to my wife and offered to pay for her divorce if she'd leave me. She got custody of our children. You can see all this. We did a documentary in 2007 called Unrepentant, where we go into this, and you can see that on the site you mentioned. But as one thing after another happened, I got blacklisted, lost custody of my kids. I and a lot of other people started saying, wait a minute, why do they going to this extent to silence one guy. Where there's smoke, there's fire, right? And so we really began a whole campaign that lasted over 15 years in Canada that eventually forced the apology of the government in 2008. Although it also was accompanied by a big cover up of a lot of these things. And I got invited to Europe, where we formed that tribunal you mentioned, because we found the same kinds of crimes were happening all over the world, especially in Catholic churches. A lot of this is more known now because it's come out as more eyewitnesses come forward. But like you say, it's hard for people to understand it at first if they've lived their whole life kind of in a bubble where they don't see what's going on in their own society. And if you know any cop, any coroner, they know about the seamy side of society, but doesn't enter into the general public. And it takes whistleblowers at the cost of their life and livelihood often to bring this stuff out. And so my life got totally turned on its head. But as a result, we've really sparked a movement all over the world to not only expose these crimes, but show people how they can, do something about it when they form their own inquiries, their own common law courts to investigate these things and prosecute. It has an effect. As a matter of fact, in Europe, we had a hand in forcing Pope Benedict to resign in 2013 after we showed that the Vatican, all the top officials, were expected to cover up harming of children. And it's still a policy in the Catholic Church that when children are harmed, the police are not to be told, which is like a criminal conspiracy. And yet all Catholics are expected to go along with that. So one thing led to another. And in the course of that work, when I was in Europe, people came to me with stories of, the ritual killing of children and in a cult that's called the Ninth Circle. It goes back many centuries. And that's a whole other area of work we've done recent work on, adjudicating cases against the people responsible. But it very much relates to the geopolitical situation because it has to do with what people in those pinnacles of power can get away with legally, and basically they can get away with anything. We found that churches, especially the major churches like Church of England, the Church of Rome, they're untouchable. They have the state allows them to operate in their own kind of jurisdiction. And so it's often the case that children are 20, 30 times by priests and nothing's ever done about it. And very rarely does anyone above the level of a priest ever get prosecuted for harming a child, even though these are policies coming right from the Pope himself, saying everyone is to help conceal child rape. So it kind of raises that bigger question of how do we hold a system accountable when it doesn't follow the law, when leaders see themselves as a law unto themselves. And to me, that's raises kind of a bigger question of how we deal with that because it impacts on all of us, that kind of unaccountability.
Yeah, I have found it, very disturbing, as I have come to learn more about this, Kevin, as well as just the nature of the world and such, outside of, mainstream media, if you will, that you really have kind of like a two-tiered, justice system, right? You've got your average lay person, what they're subject to, and then you've got kind of this oligarchic group, which is just and then even maybe above them, that is they are not subject to any it's extrajudicial. They're not subject to any of this stuff, and I know you've sent in emails, and such, photos of people having been, taken out and such. It is alarming that, that these people, to include intelligence agencies, are able to carry out various objectives and, just be completely under the radar, whether that's, as you alluded to, trafficking, ritual abuse, and killings, and a myriad of other things. How pervasive would you say this is, and to what extent do the people that govern the world's affairs behind the scenes are involved in this?
It's very pervasive. For one thing, child trafficking and the harming of children is really kind of a subset of the whole bigger human slave trade. Human trafficking, that's very lucrative. It's tied into drugs and arms. Um, it's something that governments and corporations and churches are all involved in to some degree. The like HSBC Bank, which was fined, I think, a couple of $1 billion for laundering money for the Mexican drug cartels, right? And again, they get a slap on the wrist, but nobody responsible ever goes to jail or anything. So um, it's like the policy within the Catholic Church. Every priest at every level knows about this policy. It's called crimen solicitanus. And it says, if you report a child rape in the church, you're excommunicated, which to a Catholic means you go to hell. So in other words, God doesn't like a snitch. God wants you to protect child rape. That's their policy. And so an honest person has to choose between membership in the church and doing the right thing by a child. That couldn't happen unless every level of the church was colluding in it and every level of officialdom. And that's true in any kind of oligarchic system, as you're describing, right? That everyone knows it goes on. It always comes down to money, um, you know, and if something is a moneymaker, human life is secondary. And that's just kind of the norm, it seems. And so yeah, it's a systemic problem. And that's why when we first convened the International Common Law Court of Justice, there was no mandate of any court in the world to put uh, anybody besides individuals on trial for genocide, and like Slobodan Milosevic in Serbia or Saddam Hussein. Okay, you can try individuals, but you can't put on trial the church or the government responsible, right? That's the mandate we adopted in 2010 when we formed in Europe. And these are like former judicial people, lawyers, others who helped us set this up because they know, like after World War II, the whole idea of the Nuremberg trials was to create a new body of law that could try crimes against humanity. And we created that similar new body of law when we said the people have to be able to put on trial a system that's causing not only genocide, but the intergenerational harming of their children. And when the governments and the courts are implicated in those crimes, what do? Well, they're called tribunals of conscience under international law, and they hold legal standing, as in if you citizens form their own investigative body and even their court, follow due process and the rules of evidence and all that, and have a verdict, any court in the world can issue a warrant based on that verdict. So it actually, citizens have a lot of power to put their own system on trial. And we realized we needed to begin to do that because there's no way working in the system. And we try this year after year, time and again, you can't put the system on trial unless you're outside the system in some way and a different jurisdiction and authority. And like the American founding fathers said, the authority ultimately comes from we the people. We have the authority under natural law to govern our lives, including govern the law when it's working against us. So um, it's kind of, when you put it in those terms, it seems like we're a revolutionary idea, but it only seems that way because we grow up and we find normalized a system of institutionalized wrongdoing where, like you say, a few can get away with this stuff, and they do all the time. you know. So I remember just closing on that point. Um, when I gave a talk years ago in New York City, there was a cop in the audience. He was a retired cop from New Jersey. And he said, we were always told, and the norm is that a child has to be 10 to 20 times before it can be brought to court. And I said, what are you talking about? And he said, because you won't get it prosecuted otherwise. It's not considered a crime. And besides, if you go after child rape, you might be stepping on some big toes. Some mayor or whoever, right? And so the system is designed to primarily protect the perpetrators and maneuver around the law. And then, if you're not implicating anybody important and, etc., then maybe you can get a bit of justice, a few drops of money and then a gag order. And that's how the system defines justice. But anyway, so yeah, you're dealing with a systemic problem kind of in summary, right?
You're reminding me of the, video I saw of, I think it was Archbishop, Vigano, who alluded to this, and I suspect that that's why he was excommunicated.
Well, it's interesting because speaking of Vigano, in the latest case we're doing, there was a priest in Buffalo, New York, named Joe Moreno, and I got approached by his sister Sue, and a number of other church members in Buffalo because he was found dead in his church office in 2012 in October. He had compiled a whole dossier of evidence of the extent of child trafficking in the Buffalo diocese. He had an appointment with Vigano, who was at the time the papal nuncio in Washington. And 2 days before he was to go to DC. He was going to show this stuff to the FBI as well as to Pagano. He's found dead in his office. 2 bullet holes at the back of his head, left side. And, we have a photo of all this. We got the police file with all the photos of it. He's lying there like this, 2 bullet holes here. Before the coroner even showed up, the Buffalo police pronounced it a suicide, even though he had a problem gripping with his left hand. So how do you take a gun in your right hand and shoot yourself in the back left side of the head? You can't. It's, and 2 shots when it's a suicide. I mean, it didn't make any sense. And yet being killed in plain sight like that is a warning sign to people. It's like, don't dig deeper into this, right? And all of his files vanished. Um, you know, so I mean, it's the kind of thing that you face, and when you're in a system of institutionalized wrong. I mean, people know. It's like when I got tossed out of the United Church, I was faced the only public defrocking of a United Church minister in its history. They had a big public show trial throwing me out of the church because it was right at the time the first lawsuits were beginning against the Catholics, the United, the Anglican churches for these Indian residential schools. So right when the lawsuits are coming, they make a public example of me. This is what we do to whistleblowers. Bang, he loses his job, livelihood, blacklisted, loses his family, all of that. And that's one of the reasons people just shy back from me for so many years, until a lot of the stuff I was saying and the evidence I was bringing out was proved all correct and prompted the government to issue a so-called apology, right? So, it shows you have an impact over the years, but you have to be very persistent and be willing to lose everything in the pursuit of truth. And, that's a hard one for a lot of people, right?
No doubt. Now, as it relates to this, I guess you could call it a cabal or network. I'm assuming this is pretty much more or less the same group that Ronald Bernard has spoken about, and Anika Lucas, and people of that nature. Or would you say there's factions? I'm just kind of curious to understand the makeup of it and kind of the such.
There's always factions in any system like that. Um, but and it isn't just the ninth circle and these obvious satanic rituals, where these are just a little aside on that. The ninth circle rituals are based on the Catholic Mass, or maybe the Catholic Mass is based on the ninth circle, because they believe that the blood and the body of the innocent will redeem you, will give you eternal life, whether it's Christ or the blood and body of a child. Because what they do is, after many horrendous tortures and mandatory that, they kill the child and then they cannibalize it. You have to eat parts of this child, and if you don't and you're a member of that group, they kill you instantly. That's from eyewitnesses who survived and have given us their testimony. So remind me of your question. I got diverted there a bit about, is it all the
I was just
same?
curious. I mean,
Yeah, is it all the same? Well, no, it isn't all one group, because in any system of power, the people on top have to prove that they're ruthless. That's how you keep power. And one of the ways you do that is by showing that, yeah, I'm willing to kill a child. It's one of the things that, like, there was an eyewitness along with Keith Schiller, who's Donald Trump's former bodyguard, who both say that he was at an Epstein party in the spring of 1999 in Manhattan at Epstein's apartment, where there was a snuff film being made of a young girl, 5-year-old Asian girl, who was being killed on film. And Keith Schiller gave, and his lawyer admitted on his behalf, in return for amnesty from prosecution, he admitted that Trump participated in that. Now, okay, why would he? A, he knows he's never going to be prosecuted for it. And B, he does it because he has to show to himself and other leaders, look how ruthless I am. Don't mess with me. Because, everything is about power. The world isn't run on morality, it's run on power. And children are an expendable part of that. Because my own theory about that is that and we know in psychology and being a counselor and having worked with a lot of trauma survivors of these things, if you traumatize children at a very young age, they never recover, and they're subservient they never raise their thoughts, let alone their hand against their oppressor, right? Well, if you're a ruler, that's exactly what you want the population to be like. And also the fear of losing your children at any point. So that's why in practice, the raping of a child is not a crime. And on average, we did a study of this of all the kind of Western nations, um, which have the quote best track record, human rights track record compared to other parts of the world. Even they, the average mandatory sentence for child rape is only 6 months to 1 year. Okay. So, I mean, it's saying loud and clear that children are not as important as owning a marijuana plant, which can get you 3 years in jail, right? I mean, it's a constant conditioning to people that's saying children ultimately are not important. They're appendages of adults, and they can be disposed with at at any time. And that's kind of the hard proof on the ground from the evidence and our experience. But again, like you said, trying to tell people that that's what they're part of when in their own little life they don't really see that much, it's a very difficult thing, and it scares people, you know, because we're all in some way traumatized as a child. It doesn't have to be physically or sexually. It's just growing up in a society where children are told, to just, whether it's in school or in the workplace or parents, just shut up and do what you're told and be a good drone and don't think for yourself. Don't upset the apple cart, right? That leaves a traumatic effect on all of us. So, do we really want to hear about this? Not really. Not by experience. It's not the issue that crowd. Thousands of people will come out to a protest about what's happening in Gaza. You and I know, having done this, you call a protest about children being harmed, you're lucky to get 5 or 10 people. It's just not considered important, and that's unfortunately, I think, wired into us, that fear, right?
Yeah, I was gonna comment, I think it was Vagano who said, basically children are the currency of geopolitics today. And I guess that's, more or less the case. I know there's a myriad things I'd love to there's a million different things I'd love to ask you and dive into. Real quick, as it relates to I know you mentioned, key figures over in Europe. I'm thinking of the video that you did. I don't know if you care to kind of unpack that, for those who are, I think is Dutch. I'm totally gonna botch it here, but, Anne-Marie von Blijenberg. I don't know if you care to kind of unpack that, how you came across her. I was watching the video a little bit, very fascinated by it. I figure it's important to share that with the audience.
Anne-Marie van Blienberg, she was a lawyer in Belgium originally. She was with another woman, Toos van Nienhuis, and they were both survivors of the Ninth Circle. Toos was raised within it, so their stories are quite similar. That's why I mentioned Toos. Um, when you're raised in it, the eldest child is killed by the parents as an entry card into the cult. You have to be able to kill your own child, proving it. She was second born, and so she was used kind of as a way, someone to lure others into the cult. Anne Marie was Van Bienberg was a lawyer who got entrapped. Like often these things are used to entrap politicians, lawyers, military leaders, corporate heads. Um, they're invited to a dinner. They walk in. There's a child stretched out on an altar, and it's all being filmed because these things are sold as snuff films, the actual rituals, but also to entrap the people who come to it. Anne Marie was married to someone who she didn't realize was involved in what's called Drangheta, which is the European mafia. They provide a lot of the people for these rituals and that. And she saw all of the stuff that we've gone into great detail about, not only what went on in the ceremony, but the participants. You know, she saw people like George Soros, Prince Philip, um, the guy who's now the head of NATO, Mark Rutte. He was formerly the president of the Netherlands, and he was often seeing these rituals, and he used his office to cover up these things and jail people who were trying to bring it out and everything. Um, and so her story is one of a number now. When we started the latest court case against the present Pope, Robert Prevost, so-called Pope Leo, a whole swath of new witnesses came forward that didn't in the first case in 2012, where we helped to force out Pope Benedict, who was instrumental. Every pope is a member of the Ninth Circle. You can't get into that office unless you participate in it. we have a picture of Pope Leo as a young boy. The month he was took his ordination in September 1978, he and Pope John Paul II participated in one of these rituals. So when you participate in a young age, you go on a red list, so you're an acceptable candidate as pope. It's how power works. They only choose from a crop of acceptable, controlled people. You can't have a wild card coming in like John Paul I, who got poisoned in 1978. He lasted 1 month in office because he began to investigate the Vatican Bank and its mafia ties. So, like what happened to me, the honest people get thrown out of these institutions really quick and, ostracized and slandered. And so people will listen to them and the system carries on. So people like Anne Marie are uh, witnesses who, because they went through it, um, it's undeniable when you look at the evidence alongside it. But it's their one voice against a whole institution. So who are people going to believe, right? That's part of the difficulty in taking on the system head on because you're just people against a massive monster, really, system.
One of the things that stood out to me was some type of a, hunting party almost, I guess that had taken place or something over there, and the military was used to blockade, access and such, so I just
We have pictures of Tos in the field south of Brussels in Belgium, where she was taken, and she witnessed several children being burned alive as part of the ceremony, but older teenagers who had been delivered by Drangheta and by the police from youth detention centers. They were stripped naked, forced to run through the woods, and they were hunted by as a game by these people who participate. And the Belgian army had cordoned off the area. Um, and when they kill the teen, they cut off their sex organs. And there was Anne Marie described going to a castle in the Netherlands. I forget the name of it, but it's all recorded in our evidence. And there were these penises mounted on the wall. I mean, it's that level of depravity. They even have a betting system set up where you have different groups that have tortured children to death, and they bet on how long each child will last before they die. I mean, it's at that level of monstrosity, right? And the very degree of the horror is its best defense because no one's going to believe it. Even if they look at it, a film of it happening, they'll say, well, that was just AI generated. That's imaginary. That would never happen. So it's the disbelief. It's what somebody once called the will to disbelieve. You don't want to believe something until even when it hits in your face, you're still denying it, right? That it's going on. And it's how, a few soldiers can load 1,000 people onto boxcars and exterminate them. And nobody rushes the guards because they're all in denial that this can't be happening. There's got to be a reprieve, but we can't all be about to be killed here, right? It's that human reflex to deny the most horrible things in our life, right?
I was gonna mention, that, Aleister Crowley comes to mind, in that, I think he said something to the effect of, "Make it so ridiculous that nobody will believe it," so something to that effect, so I think that kinda ties in with your message.
Yeah, very much.
Now, okay, so gosh, okay, so now you conveyed earlier that this has been going on for hundreds of years?
Yeah, it's really from research. The Ninth Circle is named after the poem Dante's Inferno, the Inferno by Dante Alighieri. He was an Italian poet in the 13th century. But he was referring to earlier rituals. The ninth circle is the ninth level of hell. According to him, it's where Satan resides, along with the souls of people who betrayed a sacred trust, like the trust of a child, right? Um, and it's actually based on early Roman rituals going back over 2,000 years. And those rituals are when children and animals were sacrificed for the crops. So these are like, you know, very arcane rituals going back thousands of years and just modernized.
So it seems more or less this is kind of along the lines of what David Icke has dispensed to his audience.
Well, he focuses very much on the alien aspect, and we're focusing on hard evidence and proof from eyewitnesses, from documentation. I often say to people, you don't have to be a lizard to do horrible things to other people, right? And in a way, to blame it on aliens allows all the humans responsible to get off the hook, right? So, I mean, I'd like to. We've always kept our feet on the ground when it comes to different theories. Can it be proven? Well, we followed all the standards that are needed to prove something in a court of law. We have the eyewitness testimonies, documentation, and forensic proof from mass grave sites we've excavated in Canada and other countries. Showing like in Ireland, they found a whole cistern of 800 skeletons of babies at the Catholic Bon Secours orphanage. They had been burned. But again, the Irish government and police and church just totally covered that up. That was almost 10 years ago now that was discovered. So, I mean, it's all out there. It's not the problem isn't evidence. There's lots of evidence. It's uh, not only people not wanting to believe, but the system is set up to make sure that the ones responsible are never prosecuted.
And it seems these people that are involved in these activities, you hear a lot of them more or less kind of dominating the media to include obviously entertainment, news. A lot have said, the banking industry, things of that nature. So it's sounds like it's extremely entrenched.
It is, and that's what I meant when I said there's a lot of money behind it. One of the things we found in Canada um, is that the last pope and the present pope both have a strong China connection. And along with the senior cardinal called Pietro Parolin, they've been pushing a lot of the Vatican money in the direction of Beijing. China is the only country in the world that appoints cardinals and bishops in their own country, even though they're an officially atheistic state. They're kind of helping to run the Catholic Church in China, and they're it comes down to money, and so it's as one of the biggest financial institutions in the world, the Vatican Bank is shifting east into the BRICS alliance and China, and there's a counter motion away from that. You know, by other factions in the Vatican that are more pro-Western. But the point is that that's what a lot of this comes down to. China is actually, or the Vatican Bank is underwriting the Chinese takeover of the North American economy by almost $1 trillion every year. That came out 2 years ago. That the China buying up all the infrastructure all over North America, the roads, the highway, all of the West Coast containers and ports are all pretty much China owned now. All the oil and gas in Canada, and it's underwritten with Vatican Bank money. So you need somebody in there who's not going to rock the boat with so much money involved, right?
Okay, so I'm not surprised, given what you've shared in the past 32 minutes, that why we have seen, despite the proliferation of technology, all the resources today, thanks to the internet, et cetera, that, we still have all these conflicts, all of the what I look at it as kind of like a controlled demolition, the economy at times throughout, the centuries and such. Why we continue to see no progress in some ways, and why we are what some may say we're already on the steps of WW3. And if you have people such that you're espousing that are engaged in these activities, it's no surprise that, and I suspect they're going to try and get what they want in terms of just unleashing fill in the blank on the planet. So I don't know if you have any any thoughts on that.
Well, this when you look at, I think it was Aristotle. He said, in order to understand a phenomena, you have to understand its nature. What is the nature of what we're dealing with? And the nature of the world political economy is predatory. It's different factions fighting to control the resources, the markets, the monetary system, right? And to do that, and there have been studies done on this, that in a consumptionist society, the economy is best when people are in crisis, under stress, unemployed, depressed, and there's a lot of unemployment, because that raises the GNP because of all those services, all those people are employed, like in the prison system, which is now privatized, a lot of it in America. As a matter of fact, Trump's Attorney General Pam Bondi is a former lobbyist for the private prisons, Geo, right? So they make money for everyone they can incarcerate. So you got to create crisis, you got to create conflict, you got to start deporting lots of people, even if they're not illegal immigrants. But they're not being deported out of the country. They're being put into the private prison system that can make money for it. So if you've got that kind of internal war going on in America, then naturally it's just a reflection of the conflict everywhere, because that's how the economy runs, through war. Uh, and it's maintained. After World War II, there was a thing called the permanent arms economy that kept the system traditionally suffered from booms and busts, and it leveled out that for 25 or more years until the recession of the 1970s. Just you need all sorts of conflicts and arms spending to keep the economy afloat. So none of that is surprising when you understand the nature of what we're in. None of this is at all surprising, right?
What are some other things that you feel are not receiving enough attention as it relates to the discussion that we're having, and perhaps things that you haven't really been able to dive into maybe on Sean's show, as it relates to the nature of this?
Well, there's a lot actually, and the thing that I try to focus on with people is giving people a sense of even one small thing they can do to not be depressed by this and defeated. Because again, if you're a few ruling the many, you want people to be depressed and isolated and feeling defeated. So we say, we need to develop ways that people can reclaim the nation, reclaim their own minds. That's why we really emphasize these common law courts and people doing their own investigations, and how there's a lot of dissatisfaction within the system. And I've worked with a lot of police, a lot of people in government, and they all say the same thing. Our hands are tied, you know, because of this hierarchy. You're answerable to the person up there, and everyone's concerned about their pension. They don't have an alternative way to get justice because it's all controlled. I mean, if you've ever been through the family court system, as I was when my two daughters were taken from me, and it is designed to maximize suffering. It's almost like a parasitic thing feeding off conflict and suffering, right? And to get out of that altogether, we need a new way of thinking and operating, where we just rely on things we're given innately under natural law. The law should exist to help people, not create conflict, adversarial system, right? And so we try to create small examples of that all over the place, and in fact, it works. Um, you know, and so that's one of that. I've written a whole number of books about that. Common law training manual, a book on sovereignty called Governing Ourselves, politically, personally, spiritually, right? So all of these things are really important for people to be working on, because everything you do is planting the seed for our children or our grandchildren, and they'll reap the crops of what we do. But if we do nothing, what they're going to reap is a devastated world. And we're heading that way. I mean, we're in like a global corporatocracy, really. Traditional democracy and the rule of law, it's like an appendix that's fallen away, right? It's a vestigial organ. That's not what runs the world now. And people are waking up to that. That's why all over the world, there's such a groundswell of opposition. You see, when millions of people are protesting, people want out of this madness, but they need vision and they need leadership, and learn how to be their own leadership about this. So that's kind of where 80% of my work now goes into helping people come to that understanding, and giving them practical skills about how we can create an alternative, right?
And as it relates to kind of circling back to the earlier part of our conversation about those who are engaged in this illicit activity and such, would you say this is by and large most world leaders, or would you say certain countries or certain continents you find to be less of this being the case? I'm just kind of curious what your findings have been.
It's like with the religions. I don't know any religion where people haven't come to me and said, "Yeah, we've got the same problem of child trafficking." Whether it's Christians, Mormons, Muslims, uh, all over the world, we hear this, and it's same with government, um, because government officials are the front men very much of corporations and banks, and that's their lifeblood. A lot of this like I said, human trafficking, drugs, arms, human trafficking is part of the whole global economy now. And so they can't really deviate outside that. And we know that there was a member of the European Parliament called Laurent Louis from Belgium. And I don't know if you remember the Marc Dutroux case, where Marc Dutroux was a child killer, and they found body parts of children in his apartment. And he started mentioning members of the royal family who had participated in these rituals. He got Marc Dutroux, all of that disappeared from the court record, from the police reports. It got rewritten so that the royal families were left out of it. Well, this Laurent Louis got up in the European Parliament and said, we want to open the Dutroux case because it's mentioning people, including this Mark Rutte, who's now head of NATO, who could be going to war with Russia. He was named as a participant with Marc Dutroux. Laura Louis got thrown out of the European Parliament, even though he had immunity. You're not allowed to do that to parliamentarians. Thrown in jail for 6 months, put in a psychiatric ward, fined an enormous amount of money. He's dropped out of sight. I don't even know if he's still alive. But the system comes down like a hammer on any politician or person who goes up against these entrenched systems of evil, really. And so you can only operate within a narrow band of behavior. The higher up you go, the more that's the case. So that's why we never looked at official leaders or systems. We looked at the people on the ground who retained their honesty and their ability to act, right?
Wow, I'm just floored. Yeah. Wow, wow. Um, how about any current latest thoughts? I know you probably have dispensed a little bit of that along the way on our conversation, but any other things that you're currently working on, and also if you could touch on the email. I know you had sent out an email. There's a gentleman who had been. It looks like he'd been shot in a chair. I don't know if you care to unpack that or share that and other things similar.
That's the priest I mentioned earlier,
Okay. Oh, got it. Got it. Okay.
Moreno. He was found shot. And as a matter of fact, uh, I didn't mention this. There's a guy, Cardinal Timothy Dolan, who's the personal friend of Trump's. Trump wanted him in as Pope. Dolan ordered the hit on this priest, according to Sue and others. He was heard to say that priest isn't going to live out the week because he had all this dirt on how Dolan and others had given approval to this massive child trafficking network all over New York, between Cleveland, New York, Cleveland, Buffalo, that whole area. And it's across Lake Erie into Canada. It's a whole massive child trafficking network across the Great Lakes. He had evidence of this, and Dolan is put the hit out on him. So it's what happens when you're getting too close. And the only reason that hasn't happened to me is I've had such a limelight on me, public exposure, and I've got all this hard evidence. It would be too obvious to not take me out now, right? So you don't necessarily want to kill someone. You want to discredit them so people just don't listen to them anymore. And they've done that very effectively in terms of the smear and fear campaign around my name. But that's lessened because over time, if you're not killed, you gain in credibility because people say, well, he's how can he be a con man if he's lasted 30 years and he's blacklisted and can't make any money anywhere? Maybe we should start listening to this guy. So the system runs out of options, and that's why they end up killing somebody if they're too much of a threat. But normally it doesn't have to be that. They can just rely on people's fear and that to turn away when they know they're supposed to, right?
I can't imagine the, vitriol and things that have had to go through. I mean, just even keying your name on Google, Google's AI thing quickly pops up and tries to discredit you and things of that nature. And I mean, I tell you, a lot of other topics I look up, you gotta love sites like Wikipedia. And I mean, it's amazing to me. I don't think most people are aware how much intelligence agencies and various actors or parties are involved in shaping and molding
Yeah.
uh, the archives or the data, and it's just it's like
Oh, it's
I
very
mean that's
much.
just a whole nother rabbit hole.
I don't know if you've seen the movie Kill the Messenger, but it's about
Mhm.
Gary Webb was a San Jose reporter in the 1980s, and he found out through his contacts on the streets about the CIA importing crack cocaine into the ghettos of America to fund the illegal wars in Central America after Congress cut off their funds. Gary Webb, when watching that film, made me cry because it was like looking at my life. They went to his family. They, according to one of the CIA guys who was talking to him, he said, "You're finished now, Gary, because you've been controversialized. Because when you're standing on the truth, they make you the issue, not the evidence, because they want to distract from the evidence. So they say Gary Webb's, he's mentally, everything they said about me, I've got mental problems. Everyone rejects me. I rip off Native people, blah, 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 all of this stuff to discredit you. Now, how he died was interesting. He also had two bullets at the back of the head, like Joe Moreno, that priest who was shot twice in the back of the head. They found Gary Webb that way, two in the back of the head, suicide. Some suggest that's a CIA calling card when they're killed in that way, right? It's their way of saying, hi, we've done this. And that would make sense because the CIA also has a close relationship with the Vatican. It goes back to the 80s and before. Um, they use Vatican money to fund their illegal operations and things like that. But so I don't know, how I began that part. You asked about intelligence agencies, and yeah, they anyway. As out of that, as part of that movie, Kill the Messenger, it shows how the CIA went to all the media, fed them false, you know, reports about Gary Webb and the whole issue. They spun the issue. They say you can't shut down information, but you can guide it. So they created, like they've done in Canada, they create a whole false narrative around the residential school things. We've proved that half the children were dying every year, that they were being deliberately exposed to smallpox and tuberculosis, killed off en masse to get the land. Now the official narrative is no, that never happened. There were just a few bad incidents, and we're all healed now. We've given them money, so it's the false narrative that they use to cover the truth. They don't just say it never happened because it obviously did. Like even the prime minister and Pope Francis used the word genocide, which nobody did for many years except me in Canada. Right now, everyone's using it because that's how you co-opt an issue. You appear to address it and agree with it, but you move it in the direction you want. You put the spin on it that you want, right? And that's the biggest problem now is everyone's believing this false story, not just about genocide in Canada, but the crimes of the Vatican, right? And these Ninth Circle rituals and that. Eventually, they're going to admit to the Ninth Circle, but they're going to say, "Oh no, it happened years ago, and we arrested the people." And to keep the crime going, you got to do that periodically. And the intel agencies, that's their main job. That's what they do, right? To control that. I think at one point the CIA actually bought up ABC News. I've got to find but around that time, all this stuff was coming out about them bringing drugs into America. They just bought the network, and you know, I mean, follow the money, right?
Well, it seems it's dangerous to be an investigative reporter and to be in the line of work that you are doing. And I'm always floored, as I mentioned on another episode, that you'll have videos of kids doing pranks or someone doing some dance for TikTok or this or that, and getting millions and millions of views and such. But content that's related to, oh, did I lose you? Okay. I thought the video cut out. Content that is related to learning about personal sovereignty, understanding the nature of the Federal Reserve and the central banks, and why your money doesn't go far, and your own mental health, and stop taking all these pharmaceuticals and this and that, and then like the nature of geopolitics, like what's really going on. Little to no traction other than alternative media sources. It's like a hamster in a wheel.
Yeah, but
The
it's
matrix.
nevertheless, we have an impact way beyond our numbers, and I learned that. I mean, for a long time, it was just me in Canada talking about genocide, and yet eventually, a couple dozen of us, when we start protesting at churches, the churches panic, the government reacts. We forced out the apology. A couple dozen of us, mostly homeless and Native people, and me. So you can have an impact way beyond your numbers if you're on the in the right place at the right time. It's like what Napoleon said about battles. He said, in every battle, there's a an important moment. The real art is knowing how to seize the moment, and then you have an impact way beyond your numbers. And that's the one of the secrets of how we have an effect, even though the odds seem totally stacked against us, right? because we can see all the power of the opposition, but we can't see any of our own when you're on the internet, right? You see what they want you to see. But when you're with other people, you see a lot of power. Like the time we occupied that Catholic church in Vancouver that really broke the back of this whole thing and forced the government to start acknowledging things. When we went in there were people there who could never go near a church. They were terrified of it because how they were tortured as children. I look around and they're right in there with us, handing out flyers to the parishioners because they had the strength of all of us together. And we need each other as human beings. We need that support in numbers to take on these evils. So I mean, that's what I often say to people: flick off the internet, have a meeting, have a dinner together, just get to know each other, build up your own strength as human beings again, because that's what's been stripped from us often, right?
Well, Kevin, I appreciate you, taking the time today to share your story, your journey with respect to also what's currently going on and such. Any parting words that you'd like to share with the audience, and then also how can people learn more about you, get in touch with you, and please share about your books as well.
Well, I think do more research and murderbydecree.com. All my books are on Amazon under Kevin Annett. There's about 28 of them now, I think. And also contact me because I do a lot of speaking and help people in their communities, do a lot of work on the ground with people. I'm at angelfire101 at protonmail.com. And just to don't feel you're helpless. And there's children being harmed as we speak in your local community, usually through the Catholic churches and other churches. So, like they say, if you see something, say something. Don't stay silent on us. Contact us, and we have a whole network of people all over the world working on this. So, I would simply say, it's up to all of us to stop these evils.
Kevin, thank you so much for your time. Would very much love to receive an update from you. In the months to come and such. And wishing you all the best. And thanks for what you do.
Thanks, Christian, and I'd be happy to come back on again. We can schedule another whenever you like. So we'll stay in touch. I'll keep you updated.
Absolutely, and I look forward to your emails as you've been sharing since we first connected. And be I guess I got to say, be safe out there.
Thank you. And well, I often say if I was safe, this work wouldn't happen. But so I prefer to people to say, be strong, be true,
There you go.
because that's what keeps us going. So thank you for your good
Absolutely.
thoughts. Okay,
Quick ask: over half of you who watch the show regularly haven't yet subscribed. If you've enjoyed the show, you're finding value in it, subscribing is really the best way to support the channel. It's, of course, free. It literally takes 2 seconds, and it lets the algorithm know that this content matters. And of course, my commitment to you is going to be that I'm going to continue to bring on great guests, refine those questions. And of course, I'm always receptive to your feedback. If there's certain people that you'd like to have on, or certain questions, or this, that, and the other that you'd like to have as part of the show going forward, things of that nature, please let me know. I'm pretty easy to access. Anyhow, that's my commitment to you. If you can subscribe, that would mean a lot. Thanks.